Opposing Viewpoints, White Collar Crime, Viewpoint number 7. In the midst of reading this chapter titled Corruption Shapes Brazil's Politics, in the midst of, I'm on page 60, middle of the second paragraph. As a kickback, he is said to have received a 3-floor luxury flat in the coastal town of Guarujá. However, there has never been any substantial proof of these allegations. The trial was based exclusively on mere indications. The prosecutors weren't even able to specify what kind of favor Lula had granted to the alleged donors. There was talk of an undefined administrative act. To this day, Lula da Silva is reaffirming his innocence and calls the proceeding against him politically motivated. I was convicted at first instance even though no evidence was brought forward. Lula stated only recently in an interview with the German Spiegel magazine in 2019, May 22nd. In early 2018, a reporter in the weekly newspaper Carta Capital caused a stir. It positioned the actions taken against Lula in the context of a continental strategy against the left in Latin America. The Dominican Republic. Manolo Pichardo mentioned a meeting in the American metropolis of Atlanta during which conservative politicians from Latin America had discussed destabilizing strategies along the lines of the successful soft coups d'etat in Honduras and Paraguay, 2009 and 2012, respectively. Our oligarchies don't lift a finger without being allowed or told to do so by the U.S. Pichardo is convinced. Even the investigators themselves had massive doubts that the evidence was enough to find Lula guilty. In the decisive leak, the chief prosecutor Deltan Dallagnol voiced his concerns during chat with Judge Moro using the Telegram Messenger service. He had reservations about whether the apartment was in fact Lula's and whether it had anything to do with Petrobras. Dallagnol expressed his concern about the lack of evidence. They will say that we're pressing charges based on newspaper reports and weak evidence. This is why it was necessary to prepare for a solid public discourse. The political beliefs of the judicial officers were revealed in another chat between the chief prosecutor, Dallagnol, and an unidentified contact called Carol PGR, which stands for Procuradora Geral de República, similar to the federal prosecutor's office. Carol PGR said, Delton, my friend, I'm worried about the possible return of the PT to the government. But I prayed a lot for God to enlighten our people and for a wonder which will save us all. Dallagnol replied, thank you, Carol. Yes, pray. That's what our country needs. The documents from 2015 to 2017 reveal that those involved did not just limit themselves to prayer. The then judge and incumbent Minister of Justice Moro not only colluded with the prosecutors of the Car Wash Task Force, but gave them instructions to put Lula da Silva behind bars. He acted as an initiator and a consultant for the prosecutors, giving them advice regarding which leads to follow in their investigations. Furthermore, Moro and Dallagnol used certain tricks to make sure the case was assigned to them and not to a different court. In fact, the regional prosecutor's office in Sao Paulo had claimed to have taken on the case earlier. According to Brazilian law, this is illegal, stated Leandro de Mori, the editor-in-chief of The Intercept Brazil. In 1988, Brazilian constitution emphasizes the independence of the judicial sector and prohibits any exchange of information between the prosecutor's office and the judge outside the trial. Ex parte. The judge must examine the evidence and motions presented by the prosecutors and defense attorneys and must assess them. The judge is explicitly banned from taking part in the investigations. The text published by The Intercept demonstrate a total lack of neutrality and a direct involvement in the strategy of the prosecutor's office. Not only this, Moro had also given instructions on how to deal with the press and any potential witnesses. He pressed for searches when too much time had passed and the topic risked disappearing from the public eye. In a chat with Delagnol, he wrote, "Hasn't it already been a long time since the last investigations? The last operation had taken place a month before, and in Morrow's opinion, it was time to strike again." "That's correct," was Delagnol's response, and 3 weeks later, the bell for the start of the next stage of the operation was rung. Neither Morrow nor Delagnol had denied the content of the disclosed text. On the contrary, after their collusion became publicly known, the incumbent Minister of Justice called talks between judges and prosecutors normal. This is, however, absurd. If talks between judges and investigators are common practice, they are corrupt too, since this is simply illegal. Sergio Praca of the Brazilian think tank Fundação de Tullio said to Deutsche Welle, the German international broadcaster. Meanwhile, the Federal Assembly of the Brazilian Bar Association has recommended the immediate dismissal of the Minister of Justice and the car wash task force. At the same time, the Self-Regulatory Committee of the National Council of the Public Prosecutor's Office, CNMP, has lodged a disciplinary complaint against the chief prosecutor, Deltan Dallagnol. At first, Morrow's appointment as minister seemed to be a clever move by the ultra-right-wing president. Now, however, the tide may turn. This is because it is no other than Bolsonaro's super minister, who is engulfing the already battered government, consisting of right-wing conservatives, military officers, and evangelicals, in crisis for Jair Bolsonaro. The revelations of the investigative portal are coming at the worst possible moment. After a little less than 6 months, he is under pressure as a result of the country's economic situation. In addition, a pension reform he planned isn't making any progress. His environmental and economic policy is also highly disputed because it endangers the existence of the rainforest, amongst others. With the support of Frente Popular and Povo Sem Medo, Nation Without Fear, the trade unions called for another general strike. The strike was against the proposed destruction of the state-regulated pension scheme, which is based in solidarity and has been working efficiently for decades, and against cuts in the education sector. In the declaration to the Brazilian people, Carta Território Diversidade e Lutas, which was adopted by nearly 40 executive boards and of trade unions and social movements, the motivations for the general strike were set out: an increase in unemployment, currently at 12.7%, wage reductions undermining workers' rights, an increase in precarious and slave labor, cuts in Social Security, the minimum income policy, the liquidation of family subsidies and housing programs, infringement of women's and youth rights, as well as budget cuts in public education. The central demand made by the signatories was the nationwide struggle for the release of former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who was unlawfully arrested. They also asked for respect for the constitutional and democratic rights of all people. According to the Union of Medical Workers, 95% of the workers participated in the strike. In large companies such as Volkswagen, employees stopped working. According to the union's, workers went on strike in 189 cities. And that actually is the conclusion of Book 1, Is Corruption a Major Problem? In Opposing Viewpoints series of white-collar crime.